normally introducing you, so that was a treat. And since I wrote that, I'm actually now an IEEE member, and Bill Hayes has taught me how to actually join the BTS group, so I'll be working on that. All right, so I want to talk about a subject that may be near and dear to some of our hearts, accessibility, but taking the ATSC 3.0 take on it. So we're going to really focus on a couple things, hearing loss and visual impairment. And before we get into some of the technology, just to have a understanding, what is hearing loss. I'm sure everyone knows that someone who has some hearing impairment, Uncle Ernie or Auntie Din or someone out there. And it really depends on the severity of the loss into how we need to communicate with these folks. And we'll get into the technology for that and why it's different a little later on. And then also is vision loss. Vision loss or lack of vision cannot be corrected by these things. It's really a condition. My mom had glaucoma, and I remember when she used to take the TV, and then every time I'd visit, it'd be moving closer and closer and closer until the day it was black. And it wasn't that she couldn't see the physical TV, it's just she couldn't see the content anymore. And there is technology to help us with that. Unfortunately, it didn't get invented in time for my mom, but it was always fun to play a trick because she had no idea whether I was me or my brother, so I could come in and be my brother for a day. So what are we going to look at today? Before we do that, let's take a little walk down the history of accessibility as it pertains to broadcasting. Back in '71, there was the first demonstration of captioning at the National Conference for the Hearing Impaired. Actually, it was the first national conference. Shortly thereafter, we started using open captions on the Julia Child show, and that was kind of a big deal, but closed captioning was always something in the background that wanted to emerge. Later in that year, it was then called the Gallaudet College, the National Bureau of Standards and ABC actually demonstrated an episode of Mod Squad that had closed captions on it. About a year after that, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, along with PBS, helped invent one of the first captioning authoring tools. I think Mark Richer may have been with PBS back then. And I actually found, when I was at PBS, before I left, I actually found the actual requirements book of when that system was invented. But they didn't want closed captions only for public media. It was important that it be for everybody. And if the other networks had to go to PBS to get their captioning done, that probably would have been a bad idea because they really didn't want to deal with those public media folks. So in 1979, the same group, Health, Education, and Welfare, formed an independent group to tackle closed captioning. And this group became the National Captioning Institute, which is still alive and well today out here in the DC area. And that gave broadcasters a venue to get their caption work done that was not associated with public media. Many years later, along came descriptive video. That was really to address the visually impaired. And of course, what comes along with a lot of these processes is regulation. The 1996 Telecommunications Act, which allowed the phase-in of closed captioning both for English and Spanish language television. The 2010 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, which we all lovingly call CVAA, happened in 2010. And then for those of you that were around in March of 2014 and doing broadcasting, this is when the new rules for caption quality and compliance came into effect, and we started measuring how good our captions were. And I got to tell you, from the PBS perspective, it was a lot of work to get all those captions really to what we thought were meeting the standards, and mostly had to do with synchronization issues. So we want to look at 5 different things in accessibility: video description service, emergency information, dialogue enhancement, closed captions, and something new, new concept called closed signing. So video description service has been called many things. There's a couple different ways to say it. But that's really the art of placing in between the dialogue of a program the nuances of what's happening on the screen. Again, this would have been very important for my mom, who actually enjoyed watching novellas on Univision. So then we get into multi-language. But it is quite an art, and I got to meet with a lot of the folks who do this, both for PBS and for the commercial world, and they spend a lot of time trying to make the program interesting and not interrupting the dialogue, and really getting the effect of what's happening. But when you get into ATSC 3.0, there are some things that happen. I'm going to go into detail on the next slide. So back in the days of descriptive video, we had the ability to put those narrations in there, but like many broadcasters, that was put on either a mono track mixed in with all the other music, dialogue, and effects. Maybe you were lucky to get stereo, and then that's pretty much what the audience would get all the time. So in 3.0, there's been some changes. You could see the top line. You could be generating a 5.1 bit stream using AC4 in this country and getting decoded at the other end. And if you wanted to get fancier, you'd move down to the 7.1, 7.1 plus 4, which now gives you full surround, plus the speakers, fore and rear overhead speakers, to give you a real immersive experience. And then you start to get into object-oriented audio and higher order ambisonics. That allows you to map sounds in 3D space. So that's all wonderful, and immersion for those who have demoed it is very exciting. But look at what happens inside those bit streams. The fact that the presentation of audio now carries separate elements for dialogue, for your normal dialogue. It could be English, it could be Spanish, could be other languages. And it also allows you to carry that video description dialogue, or mixed with the dialogue, as a separate element that can then be put back into a 5.1 mix, a 7.1 mix, or one of these higher order mixes where you have the object sound. So if someone who has been listening to VDS for many years, have been listening to mono, maybe stereo, now gets full immersion, and they have complete control over all those tracks because they're all sent as separate elements and they're put together at the receiver. So this is pretty exciting stuff. The other half of this is, if you look at what's in these packages, you could have 1, 2, 3 languages. You could also have 1 or 2, 3 languages of video description if you want. So that's exciting. So now let's move on to emergency information. And this is not to be confused with emergency alert, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But emergency information is really focused on what the broadcaster wants to get out to their audience at a particular time for a particular event. In this case, could be protecting life, health, safety, et cetera. And along with that, I think it was part of the CVAA that dictated if you're going to send one of those crawls out to your audience, there also should be a signal to let them know that it's there. And if they're visually impaired, you need to provide the audio, as in a text-to-speech kind of mechanism that would allow you to put the audio up. Unfortunately, we have PBS stations that this isn't terribly hard to do unless you have a plant that is not wired for a second channel of audio. And then now you either have to stop doing news because this is onerous. So in ATSC 3.0, you can actually carry emergency information in its own track. You don't have to move it around the whole plant. You could just send it out with a bit stream. The receiver knows where to find it. And if you want to put it in with the SAP track like we do today, you can do that. So getting into emergency alerts, we don't expect emergency alerts to change a whole bit. You still got your brap, 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 and your crawl and your audio that there is something happening. But with advanced emergency alerting, the broadcaster now has the ability to send additional information, things like could be crawls, it could be rich media, non-real-time content, could be graphics like evacuation routes, it could be video segments that are pertaining to maybe a specific geographical area that the person is residing in. And again, for someone who relies on accessibility, not only are these powerful tools for the public, these are very powerful tools for the accessible audience. So we don't want to not talk about advanced emergency alerting and accessibility in the same sentence. Now here's one I think a lot of us will be very excited about. Dialog Enhancement, it's part of the, both of the next generation audio standards. As I mentioned before, when you look at those audio bit streams, the dialogue is sent as a separate element. Therefore, when you get the presentation at the other end of the receiver, you can actually separate the dialogue from the music and effects by essentially, by either ducking the music and effects or increasing the dialogue. You do have to account for dialogue normalization and loudness, but to be able to separate the dialogue from the background so that you're not ending up in these points where I can't hear it, I start to turn it up, then I get the explosion, then my wife tells me to turn it down, and go back and forth, back and forth. So for those of us who are starting to have some hearing impairment, this is certainly a very powerful feature. Frankly, it can't be done today. People have talked about doing this using bandpass filters and whatnot in ATSC 1.0. Everything is mixed. It's very hard to take apart once you've mixed it. But with the new audio formats, you can now change your dialogue. The other important thing about that is they also have a mechanism if you have legacy content that is still 5.1 mixed, and you're not going to go have it completely redone for the separate elements. The system is smart enough to find the dialogue, so those fancy filters that people tried in the past, they actually got them working. So whether you have legacy content or new content in the new audio format, you'll be able to get the dialogue where you want it, and Uncle Ernie and Auntie Dan will be able to hear what's being spoken. All right, another subject near and dear to me is closed captions. I spent the last 4 years as the closed caption liaison for PBS, so that means anyone who wrote a letter saying they didn't get their captions, the letter would come to me as the person. I think I'm still on the website, so I got to fix that. And also as the ad hoc group chair for accessibility. Captions, by definition, are representations of the spoken word, but they also contain actions such as door creaks and gunfire and anything else that's going on in the scene, whereas subtitles are simply a translation of a language. And we're going to talk about both of those and why they might be important for 3.0. So in the new ATSC standard, we have selected my IMSC1 as the format. I'll talk a little bit more about that on how we're going to use it. The carriage of the 708 captions can either be within that IMSC1 packet, and that's defined by SMPTE RP 2052-11, and you can still carry captions in the video. You may want to do that for your local cable company, or if they don't know how to extract it and get it back in, though the Simply Spec does make that pretty easy for you. We do understand when people say you've changed your captions that all the authoring systems still work in 608, 708. That part of the ecosystem isn't subject to change. But as we get more towards an IP world, the ability to have a caption file is going to become more important, as you'll see. And you can now send multiple caption files. I think probably the most I've seen is 2 English and Spanish captions. And if you don't do it right, you can have some interesting problems in ATSC 1.0. Because ATSC 3.0 is broadcast and broadband, you can now actually send your main captions over broadcast and a couple other captions over broadband. And for a lot of people who are producing content for international audiences, you guys already have the caption file. It's getting created along with the program. You can opt to send it or not send it. I forgot to mention my partner, Mike Dolan, who helped me put this together. He actually wrote this syntax. This is an actual caption file. Mike Dolan couldn't be here this week. I'm not sure where in the world he is, because he's with not only ATSC, but W3C and CTA and many, many other organizations. So we always have a contest on where's Mike. But he actually went through the syntax here and the XML. It is actually accurate. This is not something we just threw up on a slide. It's been tested, and I think this is an actual test from some captions that were created back in the dark days of television in the early 90s when 708 was invented. The other thing that's great about TTML and IMSC1, it's human readable. Where a lot of the other alternatives are not. And this is what those captions look like over video. That is not 4K video. This is an old file. So let's dive a little bit into IMSC1. One of the most important attributes about this format, and this is kind of an unintentional consequence of going this route. There's TTML captions are used every single day on the internet, every single day on Netflix or anything else that's over the top. And when I was back at PBS, we spent a long time talking to those digital guys down the hallway, and it was very important that we talk about things like video, audio, and captions, and how we can coalesce. This is one area where I think it's very important, and the opportunity to coalesce with online. You're going to have to create caption files. If you got the caption file, you might as well use something that's universal, well-defined. If you look at IMSC1 as a universe of where it comes from, there was TTML originally by W3C, and then SMPTE came in with time text, which made the universe even bigger. And IMSC1 takes the portion of that universe that is only specific for broadcasting textual information, and also broadcasting images. And less filling tastes great. Everything else is not included, so it's specifically focused at the work that we do for television and online. Multi-language support, certainly support for languages that use images. It is a part of, it supports any of the requirements for the FCC, including safe harbor for IP. It's already in use and works very well. Again, if you're going to send a caption file over broadcast and you want to send a couple other languages over broadband. All right, finally, we've been working on a concept called close signing. And by the way, we're not the only ones. The folks in Europe, even folks at NHK in Japan, have all looked at this. We've shared information. We think this is a great thing. What I said earlier about the accessibility audience, those who are born deaf, this is their first language. So if you think giving them some closed captions is you've done what you can do for your audience, yeah, but that's not how they communicate. This is how they communicate. And ATSC 3.0, along with the HTML5 applications that Madeline described earlier, would actually allow you to create a picture-in-picture, an application that would allow a picture-in-picture effect to occur where you can have closed signing visible to the audience that needs it, and you wouldn't have to have burned-in signing to the people that don't. And that extra image would not take up a whole lot of your bandwidth, or you could send it through broadband, so it wouldn't take up any of your bandwidth. And we have an example of that. That was actually done for our friends in Europe, where they created this insert, picture-in-picture insert for this, that looks like Spain, this weathercast, and you'd have that full experience. So that's a work in progress. We're working closely with other groups within ATSC, including the interactive group, because we think this is yet another killer app that people will be allowed to use and get some great, really get some great audience reaction to. And finally, so after all that, why do we want to do it? Well, PBS's motto is to reach all Americans wherever they are, and that includes accessibility, rural, city, mobile, online, over the air, wherever they can get them, and I think that should be everyone's business. Really build this into your business. I think that some of the stuff I described has certainly gotten cheaper. One of the tasks is kind of like people that do budgets. You look at some of the costs of this stuff. It's getting cheaper. It's getting, with some of the new speech-to-text technology, it's getting easier. You do get to provide a quality experience. ATSC is a new platform that you can really push the limit on closed captions and video description and closed signing and anything else you can do for the user experience. And there's some things that we have yet to think of that we're keeping our eye on. And that's it. And nobody got the joke about Uncle Ernie and Auntie Din? Yeah, you have to be a Paul McCartney fan.
Oh, yeah. Don't go anywhere. Chris. So we do have a couple of minutes, so we have time for a question or two.
This may not be on the ATS3 blueprint, but since you're a closed captioning guru and I'm not, I'm assuming you have had a chance to review some of the various products that are in the marketplace. I'm not asking you to name names, but where does it stand with the automated speech to closed caption text technology? I've worked for large news-intensive stations, and that's a big issue, especially since the FCC has kind of turned the screws on this. You know, what might have passed for closed captioning 5 years ago won't pass today necessarily.
Good question. Actually, we did a lot of work, not in ATSC, but in my former job, looking at the process of respeak. And if you haven't seen that process or heard about it, there's actually several people who do that process. And where it really comes into play is if you're doing near live television, so it's getting captioned as it's going into a broadcast center, and then it's going to play out in a couple hours. These respeak people can listen to the dialogue, put it in captions, do little fine tweaks, and make it as good as any authored caption offline process as you could ever get, and it would pass multiple replays, which is the big stickler with doing newscasts or programs that are very close to air. So we actually did some experiments in that, and we found some very good results. And again, there are a couple people that are in that business. So I would definitely take a look at Respeak, and that would solve anything that would be sent over a satellite. It's going to go to air within a couple hours, or even a live newscast, so you can fix it for those replays and those online posts so that you can keep it up on your website and not have to worry about the consequences of having something that's out of sync or incorrect. So some very good new processes coming out. So text-to-speech, not quite there yet, but these the Respeak folks are doing very well.
Okay, this will be the last question.
Jim.
So I hope you don't mind, but I've actually got two questions. The first is this system going to address one of the issues that we've run into where the primary dialogue channel and the effects channel sometimes have two different languages in them, where the crowd is speaking English and the dialogue channels are speaking Spanish?
Did you have that happen on a PBS show?
That's one of the places it's happened.
Okay, so if you look at the spec, which is available publicly for audio, they have made it so that it's very hard to screw it up. Not to say that someone isn't going to screw it up, but a lot of the characteristics are well defined, and a lot of the well, we used to look at secondary audio as we don't know what it is because it's just called secondary audio. So if you look at the spec, I would say it's all in there. And if you see something that's not right, let us know.
And my second question is, one of the things that both those of us in the library and archives community and in parts of the content standards community have been working on are language tags. In other words, something that says this is Iberian Spanish versus Latin American Spanish versus various types of English, so that, we have bit streams that are the various languages and are the flavors of the various languages, but something that actually says, I am Iberian Spanish. Is this going to be compatible with that?
Those descriptors I mentioned, I believe they're fairly in-depth because they follow the current World Wide Web specification, but I would take a look at that if you know off the top of your head. But yeah, it's using all the W3C descriptors, so if they got it right on the internet, it's going to be right for this.
We have given those a run for their money because we have 474 languages, but the major ones are covered. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Chris. And James?
Thank you.
Here is your